Welcome to Reformed Thinking. We often wonder about the future of technology or society, but have you ever stopped to ask what's the next actual step for humanity as a species? Well, C.S. Lewis did, and his answer is probably not what you're thinking. So let's start where Lewis starts. Think about it. If evolution got us to this point, to us, it's natural to wonder, where does the road go from here? What's the next stop on the line? It's a massive question, right? And for most people, the answer seems kinda obvious. We just assume it's a straight line forward. We look at our own history and see a trend of bigger brains, more technology, more control over the world around us. So the next stage must just be, well, more of that. Even smarter people with even more amazing control. But Lewis pushes back on that. He says, hang on, history shows us that big changes don't always follow a straight line. Sometimes the path takes a hard, unexpected turn. Think way back in prehistory. For ages and ages, the main trend was bigger, heavier, more armored creatures. If you were a betting man back then, you'd put all your money on stronger armor. But then came the bend in the road, these little, squishy, unarmored animals with better brains. And that new thing, intelligence, ended up taking over the whole planet. See? The next step wasn't just a better version of the old one. It was something totally different. And that brings us to the absolute heart of what Lewis is getting at. The popular guess is that we'll go from being brainy men to, well, brainier men, just an upgrade. But Lewis says the real next step isn't an upgrade at all. It's a total transformation. It's the move from being creatures of God to becoming sons of God. That's not just a change in degree, it's a change in kind. Lewis lays out 5 huge ways this new life works on completely different rules than our normal biological world. First, it isn't passed down through physical reproduction. Second, getting it is voluntary. You can actually say no thanks. Third, Christ isn't just a great example of this new man. He's the source, the center of it all. Fourth, it spreads with what he calls lightning speed compared to the slow, grinding pace of geological time. And finally, the stakes, what you stand to gain or lose, are just infinitely higher. He actually gives this new life a name. He calls it Zoe. And the key thing to get is that this isn't something that bubbles up from within nature. It's the spiritual life that Christ brings into the universe from the outside. It's totally new to us and our world, but it's the very life that has existed forever with God. So if this life comes from outside our system, how in the world does it get passed on? Well, the source is Christ himself. And Lewis uses this fantastic phrase to describe how it spreads. He calls it a good infection. It's not something you catch by accident. It's something you acquire through direct, personal contact with him. So let's just put these two things side by side, because the contrast is really stark. Our normal biological development works through heredity. It's something that just happens to you and it comes from inside nature. But this new step, this Zoe, is passed on by good infection, it's voluntary, and its source is completely outside of the natural world as we know it. Okay, so this all leads to a really fascinating paradox, one that's right at the center of the Christian faith. To find your true self, the real you first have to surrender the self you have right now. Which sounds crazy, right? How does losing yourself make you more of a person? Well, Lewis, being a master of this stuff, gives us a couple of analogies. The first one is salt. You might think if you add salt to everything, meat, eggs, vegetables, it'll all just end up tasting like salt. But of course that's not what happens. Any cook knows that salt does the opposite. It brings out the real, distinct flavor of the beef or the egg. Lewis is saying Christ does the same thing for our personalities. He doesn't overwrite them. He makes them what they were always meant to be. His other analogy is light. Imagine a group of people who have always lived in a dark room. You might think that if you suddenly switched on a bright light, it would make them all look the same, just washed out. But of course, the opposite is true. The light reveals all their unique differences, their hair color, their expressions, everything. In the same way, the light of Christ shows up who we really are in all our distinctiveness, instead of making everyone the same. And both of these analogies, the salt and the light, they point directly to one of the most famous things Jesus ever said. Give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. That natural self that we all have, the one that's a product of genetics and environment, has to be handed over to get the real, eternal self that God has for us. Now here's where it gets really interesting. For Lewis, this isn't just a nice idea. He argues that these new men are already here, among us, and he says they're recognizable, not by some flashy sign, but by some pretty subtle things. Their voices and faces seem stronger, but also quieter, happier, more radiant. They aren't the kind of people who draw attention to themselves. They love you more than other people do, but they need you less. They often seem to have an abundance of time. And Lewis suspects they just know each other when they meet, across any and all barriers. So if C.S. Lewis is right, if these transformed people are already walking around, it kind of turns the question back on us. What should we be looking for in ourselves and in the people around us that might be a sign of this new and truly next step for humanity?